We're going to talk about glazing. Our 4 main rules of glazing are number 1, don't mix the colors in your tray. Number 2, make sure to use 2 to 3 layers of glaze on each part of your piece. Number 3, watch out for white spots. And number 4, no glaze on the bottom of your piece. The first rule we're going to talk about is to make sure that we are not mixing our colors in our glaze tray. Here is our glaze tray. It looks a lot like the kind of tray that we use with paint. I have labeled the colors of glaze because sometimes glaze does not look the same in the tray as it does after it has been fired. So for example, my purple right here actually looks like a really light pink when it's a wet glaze, but it will fire to a dark purple. And you'll be able to look at the sample glaze tile to see how they will turn out. You need to make sure that you are not mixing any of those colors in our glaze tray. Just like when we paint, we have to wash our brush between colors. That is even more important now with glaze. So when you start with a color on your piece, for example, I'm going to focus just on my turtle shell, and I'm going to start to glaze it with my light green. I'm going to go ahead and clean my brush when I'm done with the light green to switch to a new color on the rest of my turtle's body. So I take my brush just as if I was painting, rinse into the water, and then I'm gonna wipe it extra on the sponge. We don't usually use those sponges when we are painting, but we really need to make sure that our brushes get cleaned of that glaze before we go into a new glaze color. So now I'm gonna switch to a purple to work on my turtle's face. Cleaning your brush is important because you might be jumping around to different parts of your ceramic project. The reason for this is found in rule number 2. Each part of your piece has to have 2 to 3 layers of glaze. So that means every time you paint with a color, you actually need to paint it 3 times. And sometimes you have to wait and let those colors dry in between. If you look on this vase, you can see some spots where I definitely didn't get enough layers of my glaze. This green looks great, but on some of the other colors, like on the edge of this blue, you can see where I did not get 3 full layers. So my colors didn't quite come out as opaque. That means not see-through. And we want your colors to come out really bold and bright. So if I come back to my turtle, I can clean my brush, my purple for my turtle's head. Or actually, I'm not cleaning it because I'm just going to do another layer of purple on top of my turtle's head. Now, I know that I want my legs and tail to be purple as well, so I'm kind of going to go around my purple parts of my turtle, painting them in. By the time I get back to that first part, his head, it might be dry enough. It doesn't have to be totally dry. It might be dry enough for me to add a second layer. If it's not dry enough, I could think about other parts of my piece that need a new layer. So as you watch, I cleaned my brush thoroughly again and went back to add a second layer onto my turtle shell. Even if it looks fully covered on with the glaze as it is now, you need to make sure you're doing those 2 or 3 layers for each color because it will become see-through if you do not layer it correctly. So I'm working kind of back and forth between the different parts of my turtle to make sure that each part gets at least 2 or 3 layers each. My next rule is that I need you to watch out for white spots, and that might mean that we're going to use our brush a little bit differently than if we were painting on a flat surface. On our textured clay projects, there's parts that go deep into the clay that will be pretty tricky to get covered just by wiping your brush across the surface. If you notice, the glaze doesn't really get into those spaces. So instead of brushing, I might actually kind of smoosh my brush into and around different parts of my clay. Now this kind of goes against what we say when we're painting with our brushes, that we want to take care of our brushes. Ceramics, we do want to take care of our brushes, but the brushes have to do a little bit extra work. So sometimes we're going to have to smoosh and push to get that brush and to get that glaze into those little pieces, especially those little textured pieces. Now, number 4, no glaze on the bottom. Glaze acts like a glue. If you look at all of my finished pieces here, they have a nice clean bottom. There's no glaze on the bottom. If I put that glaze on the bottom, when it goes into the kiln, it would act like a glue and it would glue itself to my kiln shelf. And the only way to take it off would be to break it off. And chances are I would break the piece while breaking it off the kiln shelf. So it's something to be really careful about. So one way I avoid getting glaze on the bottom is leaving my piece flat on the table while I'm glazing. If I'm not picking it up, I shouldn't be getting glaze on the part that's touching the table. Now, of course, as it scoots around, you might get a little bit of glaze into those extra pieces or into those spots on the back. And for that, we'll use a sponge, not the sponge from your dog dish like I just grabbed here. There will be a kind of a bottom cleaning station, if you will, where you can make sure to wipe up and clean any of that glaze that got onto that back of your piece, because I do not want your piece sticking to the kiln and possibly breaking. So that is a really important rule to follow if you want your piece to come out successfully. So just to review our 4 rules of glazing. First, do not mix your colors in the tray. Make sure that your brush gets thoroughly washed and wiped in between colors. Second, make sure your piece is getting 2 or 3 layers of glaze everywhere. Don't forget those little tiny parts that are hard to get through. Don't forget to go back and get extra 2 or 3 layers of glaze on top of there. Watch out for white spots. This might mean using your brush in a new, more smooshy kind of way. And number 4, no glaze on the bottom. Nothing that touches the table. If you do get some glaze back there, be sure to wipe it clean.